Good morning. I want to start off by acknowledging that this conference is taking place on the traditional territory of the Kanien'kehá:ka. This place has long served as a site of meeting and exchange for many Indigenous nations, and I want to recognize and respect the Kanien'kehá:ka as the traditional custodians of the land. So I'm going to be presenting a paper that is co-authored with the Professor Leah Vosko, who's also presenting after me. In many OECD countries, international students represent a growing proportion of temporary migrants. Taking Canada as a case study, our paper considers the bases upon which educational migration contributes to a high-income settler colonial society that has long relied on selective immigration for permanent settlement alongside temporary labor migration. In particular, we analyze the relationship between policies aiming to encourage international students' employment and educational migrants' labor force experiences. We find that a notable proportion of educational migrants experience key indicators of precariousness while employed as students. So this presentation proceeds in three parts, beginning first with a description of the growth of international students as temporary work permit holders. Next is an overview of the literature framing our analysis. And finally, I will be providing preliminary profile of international students' work experiences. So in Canada, educational migrants are often cast as highly desirable, ideal future immigrants capable of boosting productivity. Indeed, through their educational-related costs alone, international students make a major economic impact. Since the early 2000s, the federal government has made significant changes to the international study program to promote Canada as a destination of choice. In 2014, the federal government launched its first international education strategy, a key goal of which was growing the proportion of international students from developing and emerging economies, which included Brazil, China, Mexico, India, Vietnam, and North African and Middle Eastern countries. Also in 2014, the federal government introduced automatic work authorization for all study permit holders, allowing international students who were enrolled full-time to work up to 20 hours a week off campus during the school year. And just this month, IRCC announced it will be lifting the cap on international students' hours in an effort to address unprecedented challenges Canadian employers are facing to recruit and retain employees in the wake of the global pandemic. So within this context, as this figure shows, international student visas have come to constitute a majority of temporary residents permitted to work while in Canada. Also, between 2015 and 2019, the issuance of study permits to those from relatively low-income countries grew, and participation rates among students from India, Vietnam, and Iran tripled. So in tracing international students' employment experiences, we build on scholarship addressing the disjunct between efforts to recruit international students and international student outcomes during their education. Contributions to this scholarship reveal how internationalization policies can prioritize marketing over students' experiences and success. For example, pathway colleges, some of which are privately owned, aim to recruit international students who need additional qualifications to be accepted to a larger host institution. While promising greater access, scholars have found that pathway colleges may exacerbate segregation from domestic students and fail to adequately prepare students for future academic success. Scholars also highlight how federal policy changes to allow for more employment opportunities during and after degree completion may be out of sync with international students' labor force participation. For instance, Scott et al. Find that educational migrants seeking to integrate into the labor force face difficulties linked to language barriers, small networks, and discriminatory hiring practices. Our paper, in attending to how policy objectives promoting employment relate to actual employment conditions, build on this scholarship, as well as insights from longitudinal analyses of international students' employment and settlement trends. For instance, scholars report that the share of international students employed during their studies is growing. And these studies also find that international students who work during their studies and or after graduation have a higher rate of transitioning. Bridging these two literatures, we probed educational migrants' actual conditions of work over the short and long term against the backdrop of activation strategies. Challenging the assumption that policies facilitating and promoting employment during studies and after graduation are successful if a large proportion of educational migrants are active in the labor market, we explore the actual employment experiences and insecurities that international students face. Okay, so in terms, sorry, I have a bit of an echo in the room. So in conducting a preliminary data analysis of educational migrants' employment experiences, we draw on migration and employment data merged within this Canadian employer-employee dynamics database. The seed is particularly useful for our purposes because it allows researchers to examine temporary migrant workers' employment experiences, including those migrants who have yet to or may not ever transition to permanency. The selected sample of educational migrants are those who held a valid study permit in 2018 and who have a linkable T1 personal tax file in that same calendar year. We only included those international students who were enrolled in full-time education and were between the ages of 18 and 35 in 2018. We are also working on finalizing our statistical modeling that compare this group to full-time domestic students who are also in this age group with attention to immigration status. Okay, so as this table shows, men slightly predominate in the selected group of international students. The top province of residence is Ontario, followed by BC and then Quebec. And consistent with the data presented above, India is the top source country, followed by China, France, Iran, and Vietnam. With regards to industry of employment for primary job, which is the job with the most insured hours, the selected group of international students were predominantly employed in food and accommodation services, followed by administrative and support services and retail and trade, three industries with relatively high levels of temporary, non-unionized, low-wage employment. Notably, the statistical modeling that we are developing to compare this group to full-time domestic students in the same age group suggests that educational migrants may be overrepresented in accommodations and food, as well as administrative services. For those with secondary jobs, administrative and support services is the top industry, followed by food, accommodations, and then retail and trade. In our examination of tertiary jobs and beyond, employment and administrative services continue to outpace jobs in food and accommodation, suggesting that a large number of international students are temporary support workers in administrative and support services. This is notable because this industry is characterized by high levels of fishing, thanks to employers' use of subcontracting and or temporary help agencies, which serve to offload responsibilities for employees to smaller firms and pose challenges for employment standards enforcement. So we found that more than 50% of international students are documented to have more than one job in 2018. Approximately 20% work in a small firm, which is less than 20 employees, and approximately 85% work in a non-unionized environment. With regards to income, international students are concentrated in income ranges below $20,000 a year, and our comparative analysis with domestic full-time students suggests may be underrepresented in the higher income categories. So to examine stratification among international students, we also examined their employment experiences in relation to country of origin. While an imperfect category for analysis, source country is a commonly used variable to analyze colonial and racializing dynamics shaping outcomes for migrants. It's imperfect because someone's country of origin and immigration data may not reflect the country they actually consider their home, and processes of differentiation and racialization can be very different for groups from the same, technically from the same source country. Preliminary descriptive analysis reveals that with attention to country of origin, international students from Korea and Vietnam are overrepresented in food and accommodation services, and students from India and Nigeria are overrepresented in administrative support services. Meanwhile, students from the US and Iran are overrepresented in educational services and industry associated with relatively higher levels of security compared to the other main industries. With regards to unionization, students from the US, France, as well as Iran appear to be overrepresented in unionized positions. And students from India, Bangladesh, Nigeria, and Brazil are overrepresented in the more than one job in 2018 category, which suggests to us labor market insecurity and or a need to work. So preliminary analysis of seed data find that international students in 2018 were predominantly working in industries and jobs characterized by precariousness. And this outcome appears to be affected by country of origin. These findings are highly relevant in a context where the federal government has made temporary changes to incentivize international students to fill jobs. And this is particularly true when those policies aiming to activate educational migrants currently neglect the precarious jobs occupied by a significant proportion of this group. Moreover, understanding the factors impacting international students' employment must account for continued efforts at the level of immigration policy and post-secondary institutions to recruit from so-called emerging and developing economies. For instance, mainstream Canadian media has recently placed a spotlight on the growing number of international students who experience pressures to earn money to send home to family members, including those who took on debts to finance their entry into Canadian post-secondary institutions. Many international students also feel pressure to work in order to pay for future tuition fees, which are significantly higher than domestic fees. In this context, we ask, are high fee paying students, including those from lower income backgrounds who may experience heightened pressures to work, filling the precarious jobs that nationals, including domestic students, do not wish to take on? There is therefore a need for more extensive comparative analysis, attentive to social location that further fleshes out the factors impacting educational migrants' employment experiences and potentially fostering exploitative and insecure working conditions. Thank you.